Hello there. It's Friday, November 11th, Veterans Day, and we're back on the News Project Live. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to be with you today on Veterans Day, where we remember and honor all veterans. We have our production crews out at both the ceremonies that were held earlier this morning around 11 o'clock in Arlington and Manchester, and so you'll be able to watch the ceremonies on our channels or our website when you have a minute. Our website is gnat-tv.org, and our channels are 1074, 1084, and 1094. So, um, looking back at this past week, obviously the election results are kind of story number one. By now, I'm sure most of you have uh, heard about and digested the information on who won and what happened. But just to go back through that again real quick and fill in a few other details, perhaps. Um, Starting at the top with the federal races for U.S. Congress and U.S. Senate, State Senator Becca Ballant defeated Liam Madden for U.S. Congress. Ballant was a Democrat. Madden ran as a Republican. Uh, Ballant got about 175,500 votes, or roughly 60% of the total votes cast, against Liam Madden's 78,000 votes. That's roughly speaking. They obviously were a little, I think it's like 78,200, something like that. In any event, that was about 27% of the vote, so a pretty decisive win there by any stretch of the imagination. In the Senate race, Peter Welch, same thing. Democrat defeated Republican Gerald Malloy for the Senate. Mr. Welch obtained about 195,000 votes, or around 67% of the total, to Malloy's 80,000, roughly 27.5%. So again, another fairly decisive win. And of course, as you know, Mr. Welch is currently the U.S. Congressional Representative for Vermont. He will now be going up to the U.S. Senate and replacing the retiring Patrick Leahy. Before we go on further, I just thought it was worth noting that the very high turnout that took place on Tuesday, November 8th, the election day, undoubtedly due to the high number of mail-in ballots that were cast before the election. Every town clerk we talked to said that they had gotten a tremendous number of mail-in ballots before the election. And between those and the in-person voters, about 300,000 Vermonters made it to the polls one way or another. That puts us roughly in the 60% range of total eligible voters. Very high number, certainly very high for a midterm election, non-presidential election year. So, yeah, clearly mail-in ballots have a long-term future and make it a lot easier for people to vote and take part in the elections. So moving on down from the federal races there, going to the state ones, starting at the top, the governor's race. Phil Scott secured a fourth term in office, defeating his Democrat challenger Brenda Siegel for the governorship. Governor Scott obtained about 201,000 votes, or 69% of the total, to Brenda Siegel's 70,000, roughly 23.5%. David Zuckerman returns to his old job as lieutenant governor. He defeated State Senator Joe Benning for the lieutenant governor's position. Mr. Zuckerman got 149,000 votes, about 51% of the total, to Mr. Benning's 118,000, or 41%. So David Zuckerman returns as lieutenant governor, a post he left in 2020 to run for the governorship against Phil Scott, and of course he was defeated in that race, but now is back in a familiar office come next January. On the statewide elected officials who are going to be in the governor's cabinet, Sarah Copeland Hansis was running for the Secretary of State position. She defeated H. Brooks Page, who's a Republican, for the Secretary of State position. She got about 178,000 votes, or 61%, to about 95,600 or so for Mr. Page. That's about 33% of the total. Mr. Page ran for several offices. He had his name in on a couple of different ballots. The other one was for state treasurer, but he was no more successful in that effort against Mike Pichek, who was the head of the Department of Financial Regulation for the state and familiar face to many from the governor's press conferences during the COVID pandemic. Mr. Pichek was a regular presenter at the governor's discussions about the weekly press conferences that were held to talk about the progress or where things stood on the pandemic front. Mr. Pichek gave the modeling information. Some of you will remember. Anyway, he is now the newly elected state treasurer of the state. He won decisively over Mr. Page, 181,000 votes, or 62% of the total, to about the same number that Mr. Page got for Secretary of State, 95,000 or so. Moving down to the Attorney General race, which is kind of had some additional meaning this year for folks here in our neck of the woods. Charity Clark, a graduate of Burton Seminary, I should be careful to say. She graduated back, I think, in the early 90s. I hope I've gotten that correct. She defeated Michael Tagliavia for Attorney General. I hope I pronounced that correctly, or at least close enough. Ms. Clark got 178,000 votes, or about 61% of the total, to 95,000, or 38% for Michael Tagliavia, who, it was interesting to note, is not an attorney, is not a lawyer. He came to run for that position from a non-legal background. Anyway, moving on, Doug Hoffer, the incumbent state auditor, retained his position for another 2 years. He defeated his Republican challenger, Rick Morton, for the state auditorship position. Mr. Hoffer got about 177,000 votes, or about 61%, to about 94,000, or 32% for Mr. Morton. Then moving down to our local races, which there are several competitive ones. Kathleen James and Seth Bonkarts both secured additional terms in the two-member Bennington 4 district. They defeated Joe Jervis by a little over 1,000 votes. Ms. James got to about 2,516. Mr. Bongartz got 2,503, and Mr. Jervis got 1,368 across the Bennington 4 district, which includes Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and a part of Sunderland. Michael Rice defeated Bill Giotti in the Rutland-Bennington 1 district. That's the district that includes Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, and Mount Tabor. Fairly close race there. Mr. Rice got 1,169 votes to 1,040 for Mr. Giotti, so close race there. Then in the Rutland Bennington 1 district, that includes the towns of Rupert, Paulet, Middletown Springs, and Wells. Robin Chestnut Tangerman got his old job back as the state representative for that district. You may remember he was defeated in 2020 by Sally Akey, who won that seat by a very narrow margin, I think about a 30 or 40 vote margin back 2 years ago. But this year, Mr. Tangerman got the better end of the voting decision there. He got 1,179 votes to 1,019 from Ms. Akey. So that district will be flipping over to the Democrats. Then just a little south of us here in the Shaftesbury and other part of Sunderland, not in the Bennington 4 district, Dave Durfee is going to be going back to Montpelier for will be a third term. He defeated his Republican challenger Victor Harwood by a fairly wide margin there, 1,179 votes to 731 for Mr. Harwood. On the county level, the county sheriff race was up for grabs, and there James Gully Jr. Was elected as the new county sheriff over two other candidates who were in the race, Bo Alexander and Joel Howard. You may remember that all three of them were candidates in the Democratic Party primary. Mr. Gully won that primary, ran as a Democrat. Mr. Howard ran as a Republican in the general election. Mr. Alexander ran as an independent, but the outcome was the same. Mr. Gully finished first, Mr. Howard second, and Mr. Alexander third. Also wanted to note that the much discussed reproductive freedom amendment to the state constitution, Article 22, or Proposition 5, as some will remember it as, that passed by a very substantial margin, about 95,000 votes to about 41,000, or 63% to 27%. Vermont was one of three states that had a constitutional amendment on its ballot that passed in all three states. California and Michigan were the other two. So that puts Vermont on track to ensure that should the Roe v. Wade abortion decision that was overturned by the Supreme Court wind up becoming a legislative act beyond a decision by the court, that reproductive liberties and freedom would still be obtainable here in Vermont. And just to note, in general, it was a fairly good election for Democrats. They captured a supermajority in the State House, in the House of Representatives to be precise. They had now 104 seats, which is significant because there's 150 in the entire House, and to override a gubernatorial veto requires a 2/3 vote or 100 votes. Last term, Democrats had, I believe, 99. So they needed to get some support from progressives and independent members, which sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. And also, not every Democrat would vote for, to overturn a gubernatorial veto, depending on the issue. But this time, they're going into the new legislature that will be taking their seats in January. As I said, with 104 Democrats, there are 5 progressives and 3 independents. So, and 38 Republicans. The Democrats have never held this many seats in the Vermont House, and no single party has controlled that many districts since in the House chamber since 1966, when the Republican Party had 115 seats. Certainly a change since those days. Over in the state Senate, Democrats and progressives will now have 23 members. That's, I believe, down 1 seat from before, but still enough for a supermajority there to override a veto. Again, 2/3 required, so they have more than the 21 that would be necessary for that. Well, okay. The other story we're sort of following is kind of interesting. Just to wrap up here, is this whole question about Burn Academy not accepting a designation from the Taconic and Green School District as a means to pay for tuition for high school tuition. This is a deep in the weeds issue and discussion, but basically it refers to Burn being a sort of a de facto public high school for our region, where most kids from the Taconic and Green Regional School District go. There's been a court case up in Maine that the Supreme Court decided that meant that, that decision, Carson versus Macon, struck down a Maine law that prohibited public tuition payments to religious schools, and therefore, in the wake of that, the Vermont Secretary of Education, Dan French, advised superintendents across the state here that tuition requests for religious schools must be treated the same as for secular independent schools. So that raised the whole question of whether or not public dollars from local school districts should go to a independent school, even though one like Burnburt, which is secular, not a religious school, it gets very complicated. I'm not going to try to untangle the whole thing right here, right now, but the issue came up because the chairman of the Taconican Green Regional School District tried to block that measure. That that was uh, that was not allowed, and so it just became a bit of an issue here as to whether or not uh, there might be some extension coming out of this whole business around public dollars going to religious schools. Then does that mean that private independent schools that are secular might also not be able to obtain public dollars? So for the time being, it looks like the status quo will remain. No issues there. Nothing for anyone to worry about. But it did raise that whole question of public money going to a private institution, and we may not have heard the last of this entire story. So anyway, we'll leave it there. Again, very complicated and not easy to describe situation, but it looks like for now the status quo will remain as is, at least for here. Okay, I'll leave it there for now. Thanks again to everyone for being with us. Um, Again, and happy Veterans Day. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time. Take care.